Hello and welcome to the Inquiry Room. I'm Charlotte Snowden, the Managing Director of Action Learning Associates. The Inquiry Room is a space where we explore leadership, learning and conversations that will help people think a little bit differently. In each episode, I'll be joined by leaders, facilitators, practitioners and different thinkers who are passionate about helping people and organisations learn, grow and ultimately navigate complex challenges in their worlds. Today, I am delighted to be joined by my fellow director, Daisy Bland. She has worked for Action Learning for a few years now, but someone I've had the privilege to work alongside for a few years as well. She's an experienced leadership and organisational development consultant, an Action Learning facilitator who has a wealth of experience supporting leaders and teams across public, health and voluntary sectors, all building resilience to develop healthier ways of working and create environments where people can thrive and be themselves. In particular, today, we're going to be exploring what Daisy calls the Florence and Nightingale myth, which I'm very excited to understand more about. We'll be discussing things like resilience and well-being in the public and non-profit sectors. We'll be challenging some of the common assumptions and ultimately trying to figure out what resilience means and why it really matters in those areas. And the pressures many leaders and teams face and how actually organisations can better support people through that process when they're delivering their outcomes. So Daisy, welcome. It is great to have you on here.
Thank you.
And to get us set off then, and before we start really deep diving into the topic, for those that don't know you, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work you do, but also, I guess, more interestingly, where Action Learning, you stumbled across it, or how did you get into Action Learning?
Okay, well, thanks. It's lovely to be here. And the answer to your question, I guess, ties in with the subject we're getting on with today. So I started out my career very passionate about making a difference in the world. I wanted to make a change, make a positive change, have an impact, as a lot of people do. And I charged off into working in NHS mental health services, first of all. I was working in national services, trying to help improve the way we were delivering support for people who are very unwell, basically, in South London. And from there, I moved into homelessness services. I wanted to think about, what social housing, but also housing for people who are really in crisis and need support, need kind of quite a lot of support to kind of be on a recovery journey for an organisation working with homelessness in London and the South East. And why did I come to Action Learning? Well, the long story short is that work was really hard. And although I absolutely adored working directly, particularly in homelessness services, I was working frontline. I was a support worker, so I had a caseload of clients. I was working to work with individuals on what was happening in their lives and how I could help them develop forward. It took a huge toll on me personally, actually, to kind of do that work over many years, which took me to a place of thinking, hang on, people in these roles need more support than I had thought about before. So I transitioned from frontline work into how can I support others to do impactful work in a way that they can stay sane and be well in their jobs, basically. And so through learning coaching and various different techniques, I came upon Action Learning as an amazing way that you can support a group of people. So it's kind of efficient. You're working with a group at a time to sit with each other and with themselves to notice what's happening for them and think about what are the challenges they're facing in a practical way, but also kind of what feels hard in their job, which might be practical, it might be emotional, it might be a systems thing or whatever it might be. But personally, in my career, it's been a massive support in sort of feeling more well and as a result more creative, more impactful in my job. And I love taking that into other organisations to help other people experience that sort of shift.
And can you remember the first time you sort of experienced Action Learning or a form of it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I can actually. I was doing a graduate programme called Charity Works for the non-profit sector. And it was introduced as support for those of us coming through. So the idea was kind of an ambitious bunch of people wanting to have an impact in their careers, and Action Learning was offered as something that we were trained in and then offered to come together and support us in the challenges in their role. And it was a real sort of penny drop moment to sit in that space for the first time and think, God, it's so amazing how much I can be supported when I talk about something as an action learning presenter, but also what a relief it is to hear what's going on for other people. And as I say, action learning, as you know, is not just about talking about our feelings at all, but even having space to think, what to stop, this challenge that is keeping me awake at night. How am I going to tackle this in a way that feels not just let me just hunker down and sort of get through this, but let me stop, take a breath, look around. What are the creative possibilities that are available to me in this challenging situation, and move forward in that kind of more relaxed, more open, more kind of with more of a sense of potential. So yeah, that's when it started in my early 20s.
Oh, so you've been quite lucky, because quite often people stumble along action learning a little bit later in their careers. But yeah, to actually experience it from a graduate and take it right the way through your career and where you are now. So what made you leave sort of the public sector roles and, join Action Learning Associates? What was the change for you there?
Well, I really wanted to focus on this thing that felt like something where I could really make a difference, which is supporting other people to do these jobs well. And so I was interested in what was going on in me and the people around me. I did a degree in neuroscience after I left that job in homelessness services. I did a master's in neuroscience and some training around psychology as well, to think, but I suppose to understand the brain and the body better and what's happening. And then from there went into focus on people development, and I actually became the manager of that Charity Works graduate program. And so I was able to then offer action learning for young people coming into the nonprofit sector and try to get them to think, if you want to make a difference, how are you going to take care of yourself to put systems in place so that you can do it in a sustainable way, and not just kind of go at it really hard for 5 years, burn out, and then go to work in a job in a different sector. So that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about this work for young people as well as senior executives.
I think you make a good point around people just keep putting the head down and try and work through it. But actually, I think that's one of the real nuggets for me, from an action learning point of view, is you don't have to. And it's like, how do you stop being isolated and actually work with a group who can potentially support you through that? And which I think leads really nicely into, we've titled this one around the passion of, the Florence and Nightingale myth. What do you mean by that then when you say that?
Okay, it's a good question, and it might not speak to other people, but for me, it kind of evokes an image of, I don't know if you all know probably who I mean by Florence Nightingale, this myth, this figure in World War One. She was World War One, wasn't she? Not World War Two, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so she's this founder of modern nursing, if I understand rightly from that amazing. There's a museum of Florence Nightingale near where I used to live, next to St Thomas's Hospital in London. So as I understand, she was this figure who was kind of responsible for what we now see as modern nursing. A great giver, a great helper, a great support to these injured men on the front line. Presumably put herself at risk in these situations, and sort of the way I imagine her is this sort of almost like a modern incarnation of the Virgin Mary. Tending in a selfless way to these men that need love and support, and pouring herself into this role. This is how I imagine her. The sort of semi-angelic figure with her lantern in the dark, And I think, at some level, going into this work, I thought, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be, an angel. I wanted to kind of go out and change the world in this sort of I was brought up Catholic, semi sort of saintly way. And what I came up against quite hard was actually, that's not how humans work. Humans need stuff too, need to be looked after, need to have boundaries, need to say no to stuff. As well as saying yes if they're going to be able to do this kind of work. And actually, this doesn't just speak to the public sector or the non-profit sector either. It's in a corporate role in some ways just as much. If you're going to be a good manager, a good leader, good at any job, you need to be able to say no and cater to your own needs. People talk about, don't they? You can't fill from an empty cup. People talk about it in terms of being a parent as well, or being a friend. All of these things, you have to have a really solid sense of boundaries and what you're going to say no to if you want to do anything useful in any kind of extended way. So for me, the Florence Nightingale myth is about getting rid of that idea that any of us are just give, and actually being realistic about the balance required in our life if we're going to do this kind of stuff properly.
Yeah.
And also role model it for other people. I mean, we'll come on to this, I guess, but it's not helpful for anyone to try and work alongside some sort of heroic figure. because it kind of suggests that that's our expectation for others around us as well.
Yeah. Role modeling, as you know, is a passion of mine, because as a leader, you want to role model the really good behaviors, but you've also sometimes got to recognize some of the things that you don't do so well in order to change. And quite often what I see in organizations is, as a leader, I'm here, you know, from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. and think that's role modeling hard work, and you know, but actually that sends such a different tone and culture across that. And quite often you'll hear then leaders saying, well, you know, you take time off, you're supposed to, but then if they don't see you influencing that and doing that yourself, you just see you're running your ground. And I just, that mismatch really sort of plays on me. So role modeling, you're right, is such a key part. Is actually, how do you look inward first to what you need and what you want to be able to display versus actually what you are displaying sometimes. So that's right. You also mentioned something there about, and I've found this as I've transitioned from corporate world and working with more sort of not-profit and charities, is they're so giving, and I think sometimes it's to their own detriment. Why do you think sort of that, where does that come from in sort of healthcare, charities and public sector? Because even like nurses, they, you know, they really struggle to set boundaries. Where does that come from?
And it's quite funny. I've enjoyed, it's been one of the pleasures of getting to know you and working with you, is that I think sometimes I feel like you look at me like, what is, you know, what, because you come from a different kind of organizational culture, it can really surprise you, I think, sometimes. The responses that I have. Why are people like that? That's a good question. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. For me, I think, you know, I'm interested in sort of individual psychology and psychotherapy and things, and I think a lot of how we act in the world speaks to what role we played in our families and stuff. I think a lot of people I've come across in the sectors I've worked in maybe played a sort of helper role in their family. Maybe they, you know, I don't know, had a caring responsibility, or maybe, you know, they were the older sibling, or maybe they had a parent that needed help with something, or that was the role they took among their friends. That kind of thing, I think, can play out, that you get people who sort of are used to that, being in that position. What else? You get people, the other thing to think about, I think, is this is something that a lot of women are conditioned to sort of, that's what, if I look, I've got a son and a daughter, and I look to what people kind of compliment my daughter on more, and sometimes me as well. You know, you expect a girl, I think you expect, society, I think, more expects women to be gentle and soft and kind and, you know, helping, and all of that kind of stuff is a lot about how we're conditioned. And these sectors, the public sector and the non-profit sector, are dominated more by women, certainly, than the private sector. So there's something around that, I think, in play. It feels nice. And then there's an organizational culture piece as well. I mean, if you know, if the NHS, for example, in a way you could say it has a sort of organizational version of the Florence Nightingale sort of complex going on, right? We lionize it. I don't know if you remember the celebration around the 2012 Olympics, but it was, you know, the NHS was sort of being danced around. There were beds, you know, it was all in the celebration. That is a sort of national hero saint figure, almost. It's like a sort of organizational saint figure, the NHS, for us, and the people who work within it are sort of trained into this culture of, I must give. It's all about, you know, upholding this standard of excellence and care, and, you know, no matter what the cost to the provider, we've got to make sure that everyone has the right high quality of care, which is wonderful, but also sometimes I think belies the reality of what it's like for the humans on the inside. So yeah, cultural, personal, all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, but that does have an impact, doesn't it? Either individual, team, and organizational perspective. So it's a bit like, you know, what are the key elements around the impact that you've seen that actually has sort of triggered you to think about this in a little bit more detail?
As we go through working with lots of different organizations, and we have the privilege, don't we, of working in all kinds of organizations, different sizes, different cultures, different sectors, I see it again and again and again, the impact where resilience and well-being haven't been sort of programmed into the way people work, and the impact is people leave, turnover is too high, cultures are, you know, can be sad, you know, sad people that can be sad at work or not enjoying their work, or and if that's all happening, then, you know, there's more conflict. There's more us and them between leadership and management and the other people kind of who feel beneath or underneath or whatever. And then the work is done less well, less innovation, less creativity, less kind of relaxation and humanity and movement in the organization. And so the outcomes are kind of better, are less good as well. So I'm interested in how we can tackle this. And it feels like an exciting time to tackle it because, if you think of how people speak differently about mental health over the course of our lifetimes, roughly, it's been absolutely revolutionary. Like, people can now speak openly about the fact that they're experiencing stress or seeing a therapist or something. It's just the taboo has been, it's amazing how much progress we've made in this area. So we're really in a moment where we can think about this stuff openly in organizations in a way we never could before. So that feels really hopeful.
Yeah, they're quite different as well. And so, I mean, one of my passions has always been around, performance in its broad term. But actually, for me, performance is a 360. It's not just one thing. It's not just how I meet my KPIs. And I think well-being and from a mental, emotional, and physical are really key components. And I think sometimes, in the past, some of the corporate environments I've been in, so law, for example, it's always been about the numbers, but I've seen that shift to actually it's not. It's more about how people are engaging, feeling, and workplace, because ultimately performance is impacted in terms of how you show up every day. And if you're not 100%, it's like, how can you help yourself and tweak some of that? And it does really make a difference.
Yeah.
But it does bring up the question for me around, like, we talk about resilience, but we hear that word quite often. What do you think that means? Or in your words, what does resilience mean?
Yeah, this is one that a surprising amount has been written about, actually. I mean, to me, when I think of the word kind of unquestioningly, what I think of is sort of withstanding challenge. And I think of this sort of hunkered down, sort of maybe like a storm coming through over a house or something. You're like, it's holding strong, you've got your supplies inside and you're going to just survive, kind of thing. So that's maybe a sort of old school way of thinking about resilience, is just like, ugh. And then there's a more kind of, I suppose, a slightly more modern concept of it. I've heard some people writing about describing the idea of a tree in a storm, where you're rooted really strongly. You've got these strong, deep roots, but you're able to sort of move with the wind, and there's some flexibility in the context of the challenge. So that's another image you could think about. But I think a kind of more exciting way of thinking about it that I like is, I don't know if you've come across the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, I think is his name, and he wrote a book in 2013 called Anti-Fragility. And he talked about have you come across the idea of the VUCA environment that we live in? The idea that we're living in a time that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and what's the ambiguous, I think. So the idea that times are changing really fast, and more complexity and ambiguity than ever before. And he wrote that rather than talking about resilience, we could think about anti-fragility. So he looks at systems like, how you're interested in weights, aren't you? Like, when muscles are put under stress and they tear a tiny bit and then they grow. Like, that's the whole kind of philosophy, isn't it, of strength training. So I think he was thinking about systems like those, where slight challenges can be are what makes us strong, makes us thrive, right? So he looks at different systems, and there are organizational equivalents of that as well. But this idea that instead of kind of just being strong and surviving, even the tree, which I quite like that image of movement, is still standing still. But an anti-fragile approach to challenge and change and uncertainty is that we're trying to not stay still, but to move forward and to thrive and to see opportunities. And to be able to do any of that, you need to switch off the stress response in the body and come to a place of relaxation to be able to open up to creative possibilities. I
think it's also really important that people understand themselves in order to create the right environment, in order to deal with change and challenge as well, and know actually that it goes through like peaks and troughs. And you're not always going to be under that much stress, like consistent stress. And if you are, it's like, how can you help yourself? And I think sometimes that's where some of the reaching out to different people can really help. But it's like you said, it's like you've got strong roots because you know how to deal with different situations, or you've got a mechanism or a process. in order to do that, whether that's, talk to your friend, or whether that's actually, I just need to sit. Mine's quite often, I need to sit on my own, thank you, just leave me alone. I just need my own space. Whereas, or go walking and exercise. So it's like, what are the foundations you need to develop in order to create and help yourself with that resilience, to allow that flexibility to happen, but not destabilize that core. I always find it really interesting as well in terms of what that means, but it's always different for everybody. And how do you help someone build that in themselves? So in terms of that resilience, because obviously, workplaces look at performance, and actually a critical component of that is how people deal with the changes and the challenges. It's like when you start to look at what's coming up, obviously AI's coming, that's just, bulldozers through, but a lot of people are finding that quite a challenge. Whereas some organisations, have got that adaptability and have welcomed it and start to utilise it and leverage it. But I think, what can we do? Well, what should organisations or individuals do to help themselves from a responsibility perspective? Where does it sit?
I don't think it's binary, is it? It's in everyone's interest that individuals in an organisation feel resilient. It's better for the company. It's better for everyone. It's better for the individual, certainly. So I think it's a partnership piece, isn't it? It's about, the one of the things I saw a lot in when I was working with graduates. It was just as we were sort of coming over the hill of it being no longer a taboo to talk about mental health. And what I found is we had a huge problem with the number of young people feeling that they were suffering with anxiety and depression so much that they couldn't do their jobs. And this is the balance of resilience and, this brilliant breakthrough we've had with kind of openness about mental health, is that if people then go into a sort of collapsed state and expect their employers to act like parents and look after them and scoop them up, and sort of, not to be unfair on the people I was managing, they weren't all doing that, but there was a sense that we'd almost tipped a bit too far. And then so that I had employers coming to me and saying, because we sort of put people into placements, coming to me and saying that, struggling basically to manage an individual who was almost too focused on their own mental health and not enough on the deliverables of the job. So there's something as ever in life about balance and structure, so that the two are both held, both by the individual and the organisation, the outcomes of the work and the well-being of the individual.
And I guess that leads on to, from an organisational point of view, and a lot of organisations invest quite a bit into support their employees, and I think that's absolutely critical. And we know that one of the ways is action learning. So have you got some examples, or where do you think action learning plays a part in supporting this?
You said earlier, didn't you, that everyone's version of sort of what helps them be resilient is different, and I think that's very, very true. So, where for one person might like walking in the hills, the next person might like meditating, wherever it might be, fine. But one thing that I think everybody needs is time to notice what's going on for them. And loads of the coping strategies that we all have for coping with stress are unconscious. So, Brené Brown writes a lot about this, if you've ever looked at her stuff, but we push pressures down until we explode and shout at a member of our family or a member of our teams. We push stuff down until we get back pain, or it expresses itself in some physical problem, IBS or whatever, that we haven't noticed until it comes out in a physical way. We sort of numb out. Lots of people kind of would drink too much, or even do too much exercise, or eat too much food, or whatever it be, to not notice how we're feeling. And a lot of this kind of stuff is stuff that we're coping mechanisms we're putting in place unconsciously without even noticing we're doing them, until something happens. We make a big mistake at work, or something really badly goes wrong in our health or whatever. And I think action learning is one of various examples of how we can support people to just stop. The way that the check-in is built in as part of the action learning process every time. So whether the focus is on really tough organizational outcomes, or something more broad that might incorporate well-being at work or something like that, any session would start with a check-in, a bit of time to think about, how am I doing now? And for some people, that moment of just stopping in the middle of their day of meetings back to back and rushing about and getting stuff done and do can be enough to just notice, actually, my back really hurts and I'm really tired, or whatever it might be. And to sit with, we're so trained, everything in our culture is so training us to to move quickly past what feels uncomfortable psychologically, and to stay with for a moment what's going on. A lot of our work, I don't know if you do this too, Charlotte, but I would often start with some sort of physical check-in process or deep breaths or something to help people be present in the space, particularly working online. Not again in a kind of extended woo-woo meditation, but just like, let me just notice what's happening now. And that's so countercultural that it can allow people to think about what they individually need rather than prescribing some sort of particular resilience prescription.
Yeah, I think the bit that really stands out for me there is, and I don't think everyone really thinks about it, but the mind-body connection and the way that sometimes that can bring about different disease in the body, that people don't recognize it until sometimes it's, you know, quite later down the line. And just how do you train yourself to sort of recognize that a little bit more up front? And I also think, like, from an action learning point of view, sometimes just talking through what is going on and having that space, and quite often I hear, obviously from when participants do it, is that you've all listened to me. It's like a revelation of, well, yeah, because that really helps you, but also then, you know, building on that by asking you some different questions from different perspectives really sort of allows you to explore what's going on for you in that moment and get a sense of how does that feel for you. And I think, you know, from being able to create those environments, it can support from all sorts from an organisation around well-being, but also helping, like, I mean, my passion is obviously leadership and, you know, driving those key decisions. Quite often you don't get that thinking space, and just taking that step back for yourself and allowing, sometimes I think it's permission and to do it as well. I think we're very trained to back-to-back meetings. I've got to be delivering X, Y, and Z. We almost create our busyness as part of it.
Yeah, that's another way we protect ourselves from what we're feeling. And what you're describing is a biological reality. It's that, you know, people will have heard already the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. Like, what happens when you stop in that way is that the sympathetic nervous system, which is all kind of stress response and quick solutions and do switches off, and then parasympathetic, I always mix those two up, but I think that's right, the parasympathetic nervous system switches on because just the process of stopping for a minute tells our body unconsciously, okay, you can relax. And from there, that's why digestion is allowed to come back online, for example. That switches off when you're in a state of stress. So things like, you know, as you start to allow your body to relax in that way, that's where the unexpected creative ideas come from. They can't work. They can't emerge from that kind of clenched position.
And what do you think, like, as leaders, what role do you think they play in creating like a healthier, a sort of, I guess, balanced, sustainable workforce?
I've got loads of things to say about that. Let me try and be brief. So one is about being a body in a system. I think we all underestimate how much we all absorb from each other and pick up from each other, you know, again, without being aware of it. You know, to be someone who is bringing calm into a space rather than stress into a space has a much bigger impact than I think we all are aware of, even when we're working online together. So that's one thing. And I suppose that speaks to the second thing, which is role modeling. What do you do? We've talked about it already. What do you do for yourself, and what do you, both internally that no one ever sees, and externally in terms of what you project and the choices that you make about how you work and what boundaries you put in place? That's crucial. Then there's something about structures for the people that you work with. So there's some basic stuff like, you know, having sick leave in place, and maybe ideally, if you can, you know, some leave for caring, you know, if you've got a sick child, for example, so that people aren't penalised for those responsibilities. But then there's the structures about asking what's going on for the people around you. So that might be about taking time in the one-to-one before you say, please do X, Y, and Z, but to say, how are you getting on, you know, to kind of understand what's going on for the other person. Or structures like action learning, where you're creating a space, maybe you're not even there as the leader, but you're creating a space for peers to sit together and notice what's going on for themselves and for each other. And all of that is being balanced with the deliverables piece of not just kind of getting into a floppy, caring, you know, mushy, lovey-dovey space, but actually holding space so that, yes, it's about self-care and it's about getting the work done. And that sort of, we talk about support and challenge, don't we? When we're training facilitators, I think the same applies to leadership. You know, you want that exciting, juicy balance of caring and let's get some stuff done together, because that's what we're here to do. So yeah, that's my summary, I guess.
And is there anything that you've learned through your own work or experience that's surprised you around sort of this topic?
The one that I find the hardest although it seems obvious, the one that I find hardest to integrate into the daily decisions that I make, and as it sort of work a lifetime for me, is that in order to have a positive impact, sometimes that's about saying no or doing less. So it's the boundaries piece, I guess. It's that counterintuitive kind of step. They say in French, they say reculer pour mieux sauter, lean back to jump forward. So that thing of like, yeah, and it surprises me. It continues to surprise me sometimes how much I need to lean back in order to kind of to jump forward well. That's probably why it's
quite often people say you've got to really slow down to actually speed up, especially when you drive and change. I use that concept quite a lot. So you don't slow down at any points. How do you even know it's in the right direction, or if you're in the direction you thought it was going?
Exactly.
So if someone was listening today, leading a busy team, what practical advice would you give them?
I suppose I've given them a little to-do list there of self-care and all of that stuff, and care for your teams. But the one, if it's about one thing today that you're going to do, I'd probably say challenge yourself to stop for 5 minutes and do nothing for a minute and just notice what's happening when you do that, how you feel in your physical body, in your thoughts, your emotions. Just see what happens. And if that's really easy and you've done that loads of times before, try 15 minutes.
And is there a particular habit? I think you've mentioned one there about like almost taking a pause, but is there any other habits that you've found effective that you think other people may adopt to help them in sort of resilience and taking that time for themselves?
Well, it's so individual, that, isn't it? I mean, there's all the obvious stuff in there: exercise, sleep, and food. No one needs me to tell them that. I mean, beyond that, I think it's so individual. But the goal, I think, for me is something about self-compassion, like what feels kind to you. So for me, that might mean meditation. But for you, that might mean doing a weight training session or whatever it might be. Or it might just be adapting your work plan around the realities of what you've got on that week, or whatever it might be. So if we're just talking about how we're looking after ourselves, then I think it has to come back to beyond those foundations of sleep and food and exercise and all that kind of thing. I mean, even before all of that, stopping to notice what's the individual kind of prescription you want to give yourself. If you were going to be the kind of lovely Florence Nightingale looking after yourself, what would it be that you would ask? What would it be that you would want to feel looked after in that moment? And then sort of use that as your springboard to go out and attack and take on the world and do your amazing things.
No, I love that. I do something similar. I always sort of sit and say, right, what do I need either mentally, emotionally, or physically in order to either feel settled because I'm not, or to have a little bit more energy because I feel like I'm lacking, and what is it that I need? Or even how do I quiet my mind? What is it? And that's always the check-in that I quite often use. But you're right, everyone's individual. It's like, I think the core, if we go back to the tree analogy, it's like your roots, what works for you, what's the process or the behaviour that really helps you sort of understand from a resilience point of view and your own well-being what you need right there and then, either from others or from yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be quite surprising, can't it? Even from the same person on a Monday versus a Tuesday, it can be completely different things. Yeah. So which is where the listening comes in, which we're just so trained against.
Daisy, thank you very much for joining us today. We could have kept going. There's loads of different bits that I would have a deep dive, especially mind-body connection and some of the sort of philosophies around people's beliefs and what keeps them drive into a role and passionate about something. So we might have to pick up again sometime. But I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. Please subscribe, follow, or connect with us on Action Learning. Reach out to either myself or Daisy. We are more than happy to talk about what we're passionate about and how Action Learning could help. If you do want some more information on Action Learning, please visit our website as well, on either the topics or ultimately if you're interested in becoming a facilitator and how you can have your own Florence Nightingale effect on people around you. And you'll also find a lot of resources in there as well. But until next time, thank you for joining us here at the Inquiry Room.